They thought it was just another boring Tuesday at a quiet Ohio diner, until a teenager's cruel prank triggered something no one saw coming. An old man humiliated. A young waitress defiant. And within hours, the entire town was drowning in secrets, lies, and the roar of hundreds of motorcycles. What began as a viral video spiraled into a national reckoning, revealing hidden alliances, a silent war, and a man with two faces. But the real shock. It wasn't what they did, it was who planned it all. And one name keeps surfacing, again and again. But before we begin, write in the comments where you're from. I'm curious to see how far these stories can travel. And of course, subscribe so you don't miss new captivating tales. Let's begin. The Maple Junction Diner didn't look like much. Just a squat little box near Route 57, where the waitress knew your coffee order and the walls smelled faintly of bacon grease and old jukebox songs. On most days, nothing happened. That day wasn't most days. Walt Jennings sat alone by the window in his usual seat, facing the street, leather vest worn at the seams, patches faded from years under sun and sky. The man had a beard like winter moss and eyes like deep water, quiet, still, but never empty. He was halfway through his meatloaf sandwich when trouble walked in wearing hoodies and cheap perfume. 3 teens. Local kids. The kind who didn't know better because no one ever made M. First, the tall one snatched Walt's soda like it was a trophy. The second grabbed his plate and laughed. The third, a girl with bright blue hair and lips to match, whipped out her phone and started filming. "Say cheese, Grandpa," she smirked. The diner quieted. No one stood up. No one said a word. Except Rachel. She was 27, tired from the double shift, but something in her snapped when she saw them humiliate that man. Her voice cut through the tension like a whip. "Hey! You 3. Get out. Now." The kids blinked, surprised someone actually dared. "Or what?" Blue hair sneered. "Or I call the cops," Rachel said, firm and unblinking. "You're not welcome here anymore." The tall one laughed. "Relax, lady." Then, just before leaving, he dumped the stolen soda into Walt's lap. They stormed out, laughing, not knowing they'd just lit the fuse. Rachel was there with a towel before Walt said a word. "Sorry about them," she muttered. "I couldn't." He waved her off gently. "Seen worse," he said. "But not often. You did good, kid." His voice was gravel, but his smile was warm. "You've got backbone. Don't lose that." That's when Calvin Brooks came down from his little glass office in the back. Called Rachel in. Said she made a scene. Said those teens were regular customers, kids of important folks. Said she threatened patrons. And then he said she was fired. Just like that. Rachel didn't cry. Not in front of him. She just handed back the apron and walked out the front door. Walt finished his lunch alone. But not for long. Out in the lot, the old man found her sitting behind the wheel of a rusty Corolla, staring at her reflection in the mirror like she didn't recognize herself anymore. He knocked once on the glass. "Insurance," he said, handing her a card with only a number. "Keep it close." She didn't understand. But something about the way he said it made her put it in her glove box without asking questions. She went home. Thought about rent. About how far minimum wage didn't go. About dignity and how fast it disappears when you stand alone. And somewhere, on a couch in a cluttered house, blue hair hit upload. The internet took care of the rest. The video exploded. By nightfall, it had 10 million views. By morning, it had 30. People didn't just get mad. They rose up. Calls came in. News vans rolled into Riverview like it was the scene of a national crisis. Rachel's inbox overflowed with support. Offers. Interviews. And then the thunder came. Over 500 motorcycles roared into town like a storm. Chrome, leather, and brotherhood. They wore patches stitched with flame and honor. The Steel Honor Riders. And at the front of the pack sat Roy Grizzly Monroe, 6'5", beard to his chest, voice like rolling thunder. When he entered the diner, he didn't have to raise his voice. People just listened. "We came for Walt," he said. And for that girl who stood beside him. Grizzly didn't just talk. He laid down law. Demanded Brooks apologize. Demanded the teens be banned. Demanded justice for Walt and respect for Rachel. Brooks turned ghost white. Offered Rachel her job back. Offered a raise. Groveling like a man who saw the edge of the cliff and realized he had no parachute. Rachel refused. "I'm not the one who needs a job," she said. "But Walt deserves an apology." In front of every customer who watched and said nothing. So Brooks stood on a chair. Said sorry to the old man with a voice so shaky it sounded like confession. Then banned the teens from the diner, officially and forever. Grizzly nodded once. That was enough. And just when you thought the dust had settled, the call came. Samuel Carter, CEO of the Carter Protection Group. Used to run security for presidents. Now ran a private firm that hired only the best. He saw what Rachel did. And he wanted her. Not for a job, he said. For a career. Integrity like yours is rare. I want you protecting others. Rachel said yes. And just like that, she went from slinging coffee to standing guard for governors. Her past, forgotten. Her courage, remembered. But the story wasn't done yet. Because behind the roar of bikes and the flash of fame, something darker stirred. There was a man in that diner. One who filmed the whole thing. Not with a phone, but with intent. Quiet, smiling, supportive. A friend of Walt's. His name was Leonard Hatch. And he wasn't what he seemed. Because 30 years ago, Walt buried a man who knew too much. A man whose body was never found. A man named Leonard Hatch. And the one standing in that diner? He hadn't aged a day. The wind carried a stillness that day, one of those strange Riverview afternoons where it felt like the sky itself was waiting. Rachel stood on her apartment balcony, new job offer in hand, the air vibrating with applause she hadn't asked for. She was everywhere, TV screens, podcasts, morning shows, hailed as a hero by people who'd never stepped foot in Maple Junction or smelled the grease trapped in its ceiling tiles. But far from the spotlight, Walt Jennings sat in a dark room, fingers wrapped around a photograph long faded by time, his face tight with memory. The image showed three men, shoulder to shoulder, proud and young, standing beside a dusty chopper with "Steel Honor Riders" scrawled in black marker on the gas tank. One of those men was Grizzly Monroe. One of them was Walt. And the third, the one with the snake tattoo curling up his neck, was Leonard Hatch. Leonard Hatch, who'd been declared dead in 1994 after falling off a cliff in Arizona. Leonard Hatch, whose body had never been recovered. Leonard Hatch, who Walt swore he watched die. But now Leonard was back. Not in some supernatural whisper of ghost stories or half-seen shadows, but in flesh, in denim, in polished black boots standing casually inside the diner the morning after the apology. He said his name was Lenny Harris. Said he used to ride with the boys back in the day. Said he lived in Columbus now. Grizzly had hugged him like a brother returned from war. Walt didn't. Walt didn't say a word. He just watched. Watched the way Lenny's eyes scanned the diner, how his smile never reached his eyes, how he greeted the old crew like someone flipping through a file of known contacts. Something in Walt's gut twisted with the weight of buried truths clawing toward daylight. Later, Rachel found Walt sitting behind the diner, staring into nothing, the wind tugging gently at the fringe of his vest. "You okay?" she asked, crouching beside him. He didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was quieter than usual, like a man listening for footsteps behind him. Some people, he said, ain't meant to come back. Rachel tilted her head, confused. What do you mean? Walt took a long breath. You ever see a man die twice? She didn't press him further. Not that day. But his words stayed with her, haunting the edges of her thoughts like a cold draft through a cracked window. Meanwhile, the internet did what it always does. It chewed up the story and spit out versions of it with sharper teeth and shinier lights. Rachel was now a symbol, a lightning rod for courage. Offers came in droves, bodyguard training programs, sponsorship deals, even a documentary series. Carter Protection Group flew her out to their headquarters outside Chicago. She trained alongside former Navy SEALs and Secret Service veterans. They called her Rook and underestimated her. But not for long. Within 3 weeks, she broke the company's hand-to-hand record for rookies. Within 5, she was personally requested to lead a VIP operation in D.C. Rachel Parker, the diner waitress, was now Rachel Parker, operative in training under one of the most elite security firms in the country. But even surrounded by professionals, her thoughts drifted back to Walt. She remembered his voice, calm and deliberate, telling her he'd seen worse. She remembered the look in his eyes the day Lenny Harris shook his hand and called him brother. She remembered something else too. The card. The one he'd given her in the parking lot. Insurance, he'd called it. She never did call the number. Not yet. Until one evening, after training, something told her to. The number rang once. Then again. Then, click. Speak, said the voice on the other end, flat and metallic. Rachel blinked. Hi. This is Rachel Parker. Walt Jennings gave me this card and said. She didn't even finish the sentence. The line went dead. 30 seconds later, her phone lit up again. This time it was a new number. A voice, deep and smooth like polished stone, said only 4 words, be at mile marker 71. Then it hung up. The next morning, she drove. It was a gray stretch of highway between Riverview and nowhere. Mile marker 71 stood crooked in the dirt, surrounded by cornfields that whispered in the wind like old men telling secrets. A motorcycle sat waiting. And beside it, a man with a badge. Roy Grizzly Monroe. He said nothing at first. Just looked her over, nodded once like he'd expected her. Then he spoke. Walt's gone. Her heart stumbled. What do you mean gone? House burned down last night, Grizzly said, jaw clenched. Sheriff says electrical. I say bull. Rachel felt cold creep into her spine. You think someone? Grizzly cut her off. He left a letter. For you. He handed it to her, crisp and sealed. Inside, in Walt's tight, no-nonsense script, were 2 sentences. If this reaches you, I'm either dead or pretending to be. Leonard Hatch is not who he says he is. Trust no one, not even Grizzly, if you have to. The words hit her like a freight train. Not even Grizzly. She looked up at the bearded man beside her, who suddenly felt 10 feet taller and twice as unknowable. Where's the body? She asked. Grizzly's eyes didn't waver. There was not much left. She studied him. The twitch in his brow. The edge in his tone. Something didn't fit. Later that night, a private autopsy report leaked to the press. Walt's body, if it was Walt's, was found in the ruins. But the dental records didn't match. Rachel sat alone in her apartment, rereading Walt's letter again and again, until she noticed something she hadn't before. The bottom of the paper, lightly watermarked in faint ink, bore a logo she'd seen once before. Carter Protection Group. And just like that, a terrible possibility clawed its way into her thoughts. What if this whole thing, her new job, her training, her fame, wasn't coincidence. What if someone hadn't just found her? What if someone had been watching all along? The shadows were thickening. And Rachel wasn't sure who was hunting who anymore. The cold came early that year, blanketing Riverview in a strange stillness, as if the entire town was holding its breath, waiting for something it couldn't quite name. Rachel stood alone at the edge of the burned-out foundation where Walt's cabin used to be, boots crunching on blackened rubble, smoke still lingering in the earth like old regret. She didn't come for closure, she came for proof. The sheriff had closed the case in record time, labeling it an unfortunate electrical accident, his voice monotone at the press conference, like he was reading someone else's words from cue cards. But the locals weren't convinced. They talked in hushed tones at gas stations and barbershops, whispers of arson, of strangers in town, of Walt being silenced before he could finish what he started. Rachel's hands shook as she held the corner of Walt's letter up to the fading sunlight, staring again at that watermark, the one that matched Carter Protection Group's files. It wasn't just similar. It was exact. That night, back in Chicago, she broke protocol and entered the Carter firm's restricted archive using a code she wasn't supposed to have. The door unlocked with a soft hiss, revealing rows of thick folders, metal shelves, and a humming air conditioner that chilled her to the bone. She found a locked cabinet marked Project Aurora, buried in the back behind less alarming labels like Asset Mobility and Contingency Logistics. Inside Aurora was a single red folder. And in that folder, a photograph. Walt Jennings. Standing beside a younger Leonard Hatch. But not from the 80s. From 6 months ago. Rachel's heart hit the floor. She flipped the page. Underneath the photo was a surveillance report dated 3 weeks before the diner incident. It contained detailed notes on Walt's routine, addresses, even a reference to her, Rachel Parker, tagged as inciting variable, potential recruitment candidate, high loyalty potential. She staggered back from the file, like the words themselves had slapped her. They didn't find her because of what she did in the diner. They created the event so she could be found. The camera. The teens. The firing. All of it. A setup. And then came the second blow. A second file labeled Resurrection Protocol. Inside, instructions on how to fake a death using a specific fire accelerant, mixed with cattle bone fragments and scorched dental implants to mimic human remains. Rachel dropped the folder. She couldn't breathe. Walt wasn't dead. Not by fire. Not by accident. Somebody wanted the world to think he was gone, someone with reach, with resources, and with a plan that went far deeper than diner bullies and viral videos. But the question haunted her now like a whisper in a graveyard. Why? Why would Walt fake his own death and leave her in the crosshairs of a game she hadn't agreed to play? A knock on her apartment door broke her spiral. It was past midnight. She moved carefully, sidearm at her waist, peeking through the peephole. Grizzly. Not in his usual biker gear, but in a suit. Clean-shaven. Calm. Too calm. "Let me in," he said, voice lower than usual. She opened the door halfway. "You lied to me," she said without greeting. He didn't deny it. Instead, he handed her a small, battered cassette tape. "Walt left this. Told me not to give it to you unless someone tried to kill me." Her blood went cold. "Someone tried to kill you?" Grizzly nodded. "Twice." He lifted his sleeve, revealing a graze on his arm and a fresh burn scar across his ribs. "Who?" she whispered. "I don't know," he said. "But I know they're not done." They watched the tape together in the dead of night, played through a dusty player Grizzly brought from some forgotten attic. Walt's voice emerged, old, tired, but sharp as ever. "If you're hearing this, Rachel, I've disappeared, and it's not by choice. The people watching us go by many names, but they all answer to one man, Leonard Hatch." Rachel's knuckles turned white. Walt continued, Hatch faked his death in '94 to escape prosecution from a failed weapons op overseas. But he didn't vanish. He joined them. The program. The one that decides who rises and who gets erased. They used to call it Black Winter. Grizzly paused the tape. That name's real, he muttered. Used to hear it whispered back in Nam. Off the books intelligence. Stuff even the generals didn't touch. Walt's voice resumed. They want you, Rachel, because you stood up when no one else did. You became a symbol. They can't stand symbols they don't own. The tape ended with a single, desperate plea. Don't trust the badge. Don't trust the shield. If Hatch is close, the war's already begun. That morning, Rachel ran. Not away, but toward the truth. She knew what had to come next. She returned to Riverview under a new name, new ID, traveling with Grizzly and 2 trusted riders who'd gone off-grid years ago. They set up base in an old quarry 2 miles outside of town, one of Walt's safe houses from back in the day, now crawling with dust, memories, and hidden compartments. There, under floorboards warped from rain and time, they found a steel case marked, Black Winter, Activation. Inside were photos, passports, transcripts, and blueprints. But one item made Rachel go numb. A list. Of names. Dozens of them. Some crossed out. Some circled. Her name was near the top. But right above hers, bold, circled twice, was another. Leonard Hatch / alias, Samuel Carter. Rachel's heart stopped. The man who offered her a career. The man who handed her the golden ticket to power and prestige. The man she trusted. He was Hatch. And he had been watching her from the beginning. All this time, the enemy wore a smile and a corporate suit, hiding in plain sight, shaking hands with governors and promising protection to the powerful. He didn't want to erase Rachel. He wanted to own her. The fire wasn't meant to kill Walt, it was meant to signal the next phase. A phase she was supposed to lead. And now she had a choice to make. Burn the truth down with her. Or bring the whole machine to its knees. The rain came without warning, thick sheets falling from a sky so dark it looked like midnight at high noon. Rachel stood beneath the shattered rafters of the safe house, staring at the name etched into the file, Samuel Carter, the man who had given her purpose, direction, and a neatly packaged future that now reeked of betrayal. Grizzly paced behind her, muttering under his breath, the firelight catching the anger in his eyes like sparks ready to jump. They picked you, Rook, he said finally. Built the whole damn play around you. Not 'cause they thought you'd break, but 'cause they knew you wouldn't. Rachel's mind spun like a hurricane. Every memory of Carter came rushing back, now tinged with poison, his encouraging words, the handshake that felt too firm, the way he always seemed to know exactly what she'd do before she did it. She thought she had climbed the ladder. Now she realized she'd been carried, one careful step at a time, into a cage with gold-plated walls. She opened the second envelope from the steel case. One Walt had marked "Do not open until you're ready to burn the house down." Inside was a single key and a photo of an old grain silo on the outskirts of Riverview, with the words, "Final Archive," written in Walt's tight script across the back. They waited for nightfall, moving quiet through the back roads with the steel-colored sky melting into ash above them. The silo had been abandoned for decades, rust chewing through its bones, windows shattered by years of storms. But the door, thick, reinforced steel, was freshly oiled. Rachel used the key. It clicked once. Then twice. Then slid open like a throat ready to speak after years of silence. Inside, everything changed. The interior was pristine. Polished floors. Fluorescent lights. Servers humming with life. It wasn't a silo, it was a data vault disguised as ruins. And Walt, God help him, had broken into it long ago and made it his war chest. Walls covered in maps. Monitors tracking movement across cities. Digital files labeled with codenames like Project Puppet Master, Echo Protocol, and Dead Ledger. But what stopped Rachel cold was the folder marked Controlled Collapse, Phase 4. She opened it with a heart already half broken. Inside were plans to use viral content, videos, outrage, rapid polarization, to elevate select individuals into positions of cultural power. These individuals would be guided through orchestrated scandals, rehabilitated through media narratives, and then placed into influence networks where they'd unknowingly serve as brand ambassadors for a security industrial complex hidden behind corporate fronts like Carter Protection Group. Rachel wasn't just recruited. She was the pilot test. A low beep sounded from the back of the room. Someone had tripped the perimeter. Grizzly drew his pistol, the old steel glinting like moonlight on a blade. Rachel shut down the monitors, grabbed what she could, and killed the lights. Outside, headlights cut through the dark. Two black SUVs, engines idling with that quiet, expensive hum only government-adjacent men could afford. From the first car, a silhouette stepped out, tall, clean-cut, no raincoat, no hesitation. He walked like a man who didn't need cover, because nothing had ever touched him. Carter. Or Hatch. Or whoever the hell he really was. Rachel watched him through the broken window, every fiber in her body pulled tight. She didn't feel fear. She felt clarity, the kind that comes when a person sees the storm and decides not to run, but to step directly into its path. Rachel, Carter called out, voice calm, amplified by a small mic at his collar. You've been busy. I'm impressed. I didn't expect you to make it this far. Grizzly muttered, we can take him. No, Rachel said. We need him to talk first. She stepped out. Alone. The rain hit her like needles, cold and unforgiving. Why me? She asked, her voice louder than she intended, her boots steady in the mud. Carter smiled the way a man smiles when the chessboard is already won. Because America doesn't listen to politicians anymore. Doesn't trust suits. Doesn't even trust its own reflection. But you? A waitress who stood up when others sat down. They'd follow you into fire. You tried to manufacture a revolution, she said. And you killed Walt to keep it quiet. Carter tilted his head. Walt was never supposed to die. That was his decision. The words hit her like ice. He contacted us a year ago, Carter continued. Said he was ready to come back in. Said he had a candidate worth building. You're lying, Rachel said. Carter reached into his coat slowly and tossed something through the rain. It landed at her feet, a flash drive sealed in plastic, marked with Walt's initials. You'll see, Carter said. He was playing the long game. He just didn't think you'd find the silo. She didn't pick it up. Not yet. You can end this, Carter said. Come back. We'll rewrite the narrative. You'll disappear for a year. Return with a redemption arc. Then you get to lead something real. Rachel stared at him for a long, heavy second. Lead what? Carter's smile widened. America. She didn't answer. She turned. And walked away. Back into the silo. Back into the shadows. Grizzly was already loading the data onto drives, burning hard copies, rigging the place with thermite. If they were going to expose Black Winter, they had to move now, before Carter's media arm rewrote the truth and turned her into the villain of her own story. At midnight, they detonated the silo. The fire stretched 100 feet high. Carter didn't flinch. He watched it burn like a man watching an old version of himself go up in smoke. Rachel turned to Grizzly. We need one last thing. What's that? A funeral. For Walt. She nodded. But this time, we make sure everyone shows up. 3 days later, in a field outside Riverview, the largest gathering of bikers, veterans, and townsfolk ever seen in Ohio rolled in like thunder. Flags were raised. Engines roared. And at the front, Rachel stood beneath a hand-carved sign that read, "Walter Jennings Memorial Rally for the Truth." She stepped up to the microphone, the crowd going silent, the moment heavy with reverence. "You tried to shame an old man," she said. "He gave you grace instead of hate. You tried to bury him. He gave us fire instead of fear. Walt Jennings didn't die in vain, he gave us the blueprint." The speech was broadcast nationwide. And just before the feed cut off, Rachel dropped a bomb. "Leonard Hatch is alive. His real name is Samuel Carter. And he runs a machine that feeds off our silence." Then the screen went black. And the war for the truth began. The first shot wasn't fired with a bullet, it was fired with a truth no one could ignore. The moment Rachel's broadcast ended, the internet erupted like a struck match dropped in a field of dry lies. Her words spun across the world like a whip, leaving behind sparks in living rooms, war rooms, newsrooms. Cable networks tried to bury it under lighter stories, but it was too late. The flame had already reached the barn. Within hours, forums and veteran networks began posting evidence, old photographs, contracts, whistleblower testimonies from long-forgotten field agents who thought their silence had bought them peace. But now, seeing Rachel rise against the machine, they started stepping forward, their voices trembling but resolute. A map formed, a pattern of towns, operatives, fake deaths, and manufactured redemption stories used to shape the national mood like clay in a hand wearing a corporate ring. And deep inside a high-rise in D.C., Leonard Hatch, still wearing the Carter mask like a second skin, watched the screen in silence, sipping scotch like a man who knew the war had finally found its way to his doorstep. He didn't panic. He smiled. "Let them rage," he told his assistant. "They still believe this is about justice." He turned the monitor toward her. On it, live footage showed thousands gathering in front of Capitol buildings, chanting Rachel's name not as a person, but as a warning, "We see you now." Meanwhile, Rachel and Grizzly moved like ghosts across state lines, avoiding major roads, sleeping in safe houses used by the old riders during their smuggling days. The closer they got to D.C., the colder the air felt, not from weather, but from the weight of something ancient and rotten that waited for them at the heart of it all. On the third night, Rachel stared into the flames of a campfire behind an abandoned train station and said the words she hadn't dared speak aloud before. "He used Walt," she whispered. "But I think Walt knew he'd be used." Grizzly nodded slowly, his eyes distant. "Old man once told me, if you can't stop the monster, make it choke on your bones." They said nothing else that night. The final act began in the National Archive of Security Holdings, a fortress-like structure wrapped in stone, sealed behind biometric locks, and guarded by men who answered only to command codes most senators couldn't pronounce. The writers had found a way in, through one of Walt's oldest contacts, a janitor named Ellis who used to clean for the agency but had once been saved by Walt in a barroom brawl back in '72. Ellis got them inside at 3:14 a.m. sharp. They didn't expect to find the truth so easily. But there it was, an entire wing labeled Continuity of Persuasion Operations, filled with boxes labeled not in numbers, but in names. Every one of them someone the public had loved, hated, rallied behind, or mourned. Every one of them, a character, not a citizen. Rachel found her own file. Inside was a full dossier detailing everything, her past jobs, her habits, her psychology profile, and a document labeled Public Sympathetic Threshold Score, exceptional. They had rated her like a product. Stamped her as viable. Approved her for exposure, then disaster, then rehabilitation, all leading to influence over policy through civilian trust engagement. She wasn't the hero. She was the ad. But tucked beneath the file was something else. A video cassette. Unlabeled. Unmarked. Rachel borrowed a dusty machine from the archive's AV wing and played it in silence. The screen flickered. Then lit up. It was Walt. But not a message. Not a goodbye. A confession. "Name's Walter Jennings," he began, seated in a bare room, flag on the wall behind him, eyes sharp but burdened. If this tape's found, that means I'm either dead, or I did what I swore I'd never do again, I compromised. He inhaled, deeply, like a man about to jump. I worked with Leonard Hatch in '86. We ran ops in places God turned his back on. He saved my life. Then took others I didn't want taken. I left. Thought I could disappear. But you don't just walk away from a man like that. So I made a deal, I'd help them one last time. I'd find a person of principle, get her close to them, and then let her blow the whole damn thing apart from inside. Rachel's blood turned to lead. This isn't about revenge, Walt continued. This is about something older. They've turned freedom into theater. Democracy into product placement. And they think they'll win, because they've never seen the people stand as one. He looked up. You were never the pawn, Rachel. You were the match. Burn it down. Outside the archive, police cruisers screamed across the empty streets, lights cutting through fog like judgment. Carter had found them. The riders took up defense positions, every one of them ready to bleed if it meant buying Rachel one more hour. And then, just as the first shots rang out, Rachel hit send on a secure uplink. The files went everywhere. Journalists. Activists. Even the Pentagon. And then she did one last thing. She called him. Leonard Hatch answered on the first ring. Rachel, he said. Calm. Still smug. You're making this worse than it needs to be. I know, she said, her voice steady. That's the point. He chuckled. What do you want? A headline? A parade? No, she said. I want the people you silenced to know they weren't crazy. I want you to watch the empire fall one brick at a time. There was silence. Then Hatch said something she didn't expect. I tried to save him, you know. Walt. I offered him everything. Pension. Pardon. Peace. Rachel closed her eyes. He didn't want peace. He wanted justice. Hatch sighed. Then he died for nothing. No, Rachel said. He died so you would. And with that, she ended the call. The trial that followed lasted 7 weeks. Leonard Hatch was arrested for federal crimes so old they had to rewrite statutes just to hold him accountable. His face was paraded through every screen in America, no longer the composed executive, but a haunted man handcuffed in silence, as the very machine he built turned to rust before his eyes. Rachel never took another job in security. She declined every book deal, every speaking tour, every political offer. Instead, she bought a small diner outside Riverview. Called it Walt's. And every morning, she brewed coffee and served veterans with stories heavy as iron, wearing a smile Walt would have called just right. But once a year, something strange happens in Riverview. Hundreds of bikes line the streets. They come from every state. They eat. They laugh. They ride together in silence. And every last one of them leaves a patch on the chair Walt used to sit in. A patch that reads, Stand quiet. Strike loud. Because some legends wear medals. Others wear leather. And some never die. They just wait for the next storm. Write in the comments where you're from, let's see how far these stories can spread. And of course, subscribe so you don't miss new exciting stories. See you soon.